Are you already feeling the pain of goodbye? Do you feel like you're saying goodbye even before it's time, as if something inside you is already grieving, even though the person you love is still here? That feeling, although hard to explain, is more common than it seems, and it has a name: anticipatory grief. If you're living alongside a parent, grandparent, or any loved one facing a chronic, degenerative, or terminal illness, you may have already felt that silent weight in your chest. The feeling of living each day as if it were the last. The fear of going to sleep and waking up to an absence. The sincere wish for your loved one's pain to end, and at the same time, the guilt that comes with wishing for it. This video is for you, for the caregivers, the ones who love, the ones who suffer in silence with no one to talk to. Today we're going to talk about grief that begins before the final loss, about the lump in your throat that won't go away, the exhaustion that keeps building, and the guilt that refuses to let go. We're not here to give you ready-made answers, but to offer you comfort. Together we'll understand what anticipatory grief is, why it brings so much guilt, and how we can go through this process with more compassion, not just for those we love, but for ourselves. You deserve to be supported. And in this space, that begins now. What you're feeling has a name. Anticipatory grief is the process of emotionally experiencing the loss of a loved one before physical death occurs. It can begin weeks, months, or even years before the actual farewell, especially when we're dealing with incurable illnesses or conditions that slowly deteriorate the identity of someone we love. It's a pain that blends into the caregiving routine. You wake up every day, prepare medications, feed, help with bathing, hold their hand, but you feel like you're gradually losing someone. Sometimes the conversations are gone. Other times the body is there, but the mind has already left. It's like grieving in silent, almost invisible installments. And what makes it even more complex is that this kind of grief isn't socially recognized. No one sends flowers. No one asks, "How are you holding up through all this?" There's an expectation, even if unspoken, that you stay strong, helpful, available, as if your pain only becomes valid once the loss is official. But the truth is, you're already losing, little by little, in small, painful pieces. This grief is different from what comes after death. It's more ambiguous, more lonely, because the person is still here, but not the same. And neither are you. It's natural for conflicting emotions to come up: deep sadness and relief, love and frustration, longing for someone who is still physically present. And it's okay to feel that way. It's human. Loving someone who is suffering can also mean wishing for that suffering to end. And that wish, as painful as it is, does not make your love any less real. Understanding anticipatory grief is the first step to easing the weight of guilt. You're not becoming insensitive. You're just trying to survive something that already hurts, even before it fully happens. Why do we feel guilt before it's time? Now that we understand what anticipatory grief is, one of the most difficult and personal questions arises. Why do we feel so much guilt? Guilt often comes from the unrealistic expectation that we must be tireless, patient, and available, always. Society idealizes the role of the caregiver, as if love demands perfection. But the truth is, no one can give their all the time without breaking inside. When you feel relieved seeing your loved one's suffering ease, even if that means they're passing, that's guilt. When you think, "I can't bear to see them like this anymore," and then immediately judge yourself for thinking it, that's guilt too. When you need time for yourself and feel selfish, once again, that's guilt. As hard as it is, this feeling is trying to protect you. Guilt shows up as a sign that you care. It's not a sentence. It's an inner cry for validation. That's why the first step is understanding. Feeling guilty doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It simply means you're trying to balance love with limits, care with exhaustion, hope with reality. There's also something deeper. Many of us grew up believing that true love means sacrifice, that to prove how much we love someone, we have to erase ourselves. But that's not love. Love isn't about disappearing, and it's about being present, even with boundaries, and feeling like you're reaching your limit doesn't make you less loving. It makes you human. Another important point, guilt often hides fear. Fear of loss, of failure, of not having said or done enough. Fear of not being able to bear the absence. When we name those fears, we begin to understand what lies behind the pain, and that allows us to meet ourselves with more compassion. Finally, it's important to remember, guilt doesn't have to be carried alone. When you talk about it, you create space for support. And when that happens, something begins to shift inside. Signs: you may be experiencing anticipatory grief. It's not always easy to recognize that we're already grieving. Since the loss hasn't happened in a definitive way, many people take a long time to realize that what they're feeling is, in fact, a legitimate form of grief. That's why identifying the signs can be an important step toward naming what's going on inside and beginning to approach this process with more kindness. See if you recognize yourself in any of these signs: constant sadness, even in calm moments. You feel a persistent heaviness in your chest, like something is always out of place, even on uneventful days. Difficulty talking about the future, making plans feels uncomfortable, almost like a betrayal. There's a sense of emotional paralysis. Imagining life after is hard. Ambiguous feelings: you find yourself swinging between deep love and extreme exhaustion. Sometimes you want to be close. Other times, all you want is to run away and breathe. Isolation: you avoid talking to friends or family about what you're feeling, not because you don't trust them, but because you're afraid they won't understand, or you don't even know where to begin. Disconnection from your own life: you feel like you're on pause. Your routine revolves around caregiving, and your identity seems to have dissolved into that role. Recurring thoughts about the loss: even if you don't want to, you catch yourself imagining what it will be like when the person is gone, and then feel guilty for having those thoughts. These signs don't mean there's something wrong with you. They show that you're going through a deep, quiet process that often goes unnoticed by others. Recognizing this invisible grief is the first step to easing the emotional burden. When I realized I was already saying goodbye, a true story. I didn't know I was grieving. I just knew I was tired. Not of my dad, but of what he had become in the last few months. That's how Anna begins her story. She's 42 years old and spent nearly 2 years caring for her father, who had advanced stage Alzheimer's. At first, it was mild forgetfulness. Then came the confusion, the falls, the difficult baths, the days he didn't recognize his daughter. One day, he called me my teacher. I smiled, but then I went back to my room and cried for an hour. It felt like a part of him had left, and I didn't know if it would ever come back. Anna shares that she began to feel guilty for not being strong all the time. Sometimes she would look at her father and think, "Where did he go?" And then the self-judgment would follow. "How can I think that? He's here. He's alive." It was during a conversation with a psychologist that she first heard the term anticipatory grief. And suddenly, everything made sense. I was grieving. It's just that no one could see it, because he was still breathing, still sitting on the living room couch. But he was no longer the same man who taught me how to ride a bike. By giving a name to what she was feeling, Anna says something opened inside her. It didn't fix everything, but it freed me. It allowed me to cry without guilt. It gave me permission to be tired and still love him deeply. What this story shows us is that validating our own suffering is an act of love. Love for ourselves. Love for the person who's sharing this journey with us. Anna still grieved deeply when the real loss came months later, but she arrived at that moment less overwhelmed, more aware of her feelings, and more at peace. Your limits are sacred too. If Anna's story teaches us anything, it's that no one goes through grief, anticipatory or not, without being deeply transformed. And in that journey, there's a truth that's often overlooked. Your limits matter too. They also deserve to be respected. Caring for someone is undoubtedly an act of love, but when caregiving turns into self-erasure, love begins to hurt in an unsustainable way. Many family members believe they must be strong all the time, as if admitting exhaustion means weakness or abandonment. But the opposite is true. Recognizing your limits is what allows for true presence. It's what keeps you from losing yourself. You have the right to rest, to ask for help, to say, "I can't do this today." You have the right to cry because you're tired, and not feel guilty about it. Care is only possible when it's shared, and love does not require you to destroy yourself to prove it. It's important to remember, when you listen to yourself, you teach others to do the same. When you respect yourself, you create a more human space for everyone around you. And if you feel like no one sees your effort, start by recognizing it yourself. Your pain is valid. Your effort is real. Your limit is sacred. Taking care of yourself in the midst of anticipatory grief is an act of courage. It's not about abandoning the other. It's about staying whole enough to remain present with more honesty, more lightness, and more love. Caring for yourself while caring for someone else, is it possible? It might seem impossible. How can you take care of yourself when someone else needs you so much? How can you think about a long shower, a quiet walk, or a lighthearted conversation with a friend when there's someone sick, fragile, and dependent right beside you? The answer isn't simple, but it exists. Yes, it is possible to care for yourself while caring for someone else. And not only is it possible, it's necessary. Caring doesn't have to mean sacrificing your emotional, physical, and mental health. The key lies in small practices, in subtle but powerful gestures that restore your sense of humanity amid the overload. Here are some practical strategies, micro-care routines. Even if you can't take an hour for yourself, you can start with 5 minutes of stillness a day. A warm cup of tea, a deep breath while looking out the window, a shower where you allow yourself to be present in the now. Support network, even a small one. You don't have to do everything alone. Try to share tasks with other family members, friends, or professionals. Let others participate. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. Name your feelings, write, talk, vent, give your emotions a name. This helps organize your mind and eases internal pressure. Sometimes, one honest conversation with someone you trust is worth more than an entire day of silent struggle. Small reminders of your identity. Keep parts of your life alive that aren't tied to your caregiving role. Listen to a song you love, read 2 pages of a book, cook something just for you. Seek professional help. If possible, connect with a therapist. It's a safe space to validate your pain, welcome your inner conflicts, and build new ways to cope with it all. Remember, you don't care better by erasing yourself. You care better when you're whole, even in pieces, as long as those pieces are treated with kindness. When goodbye finally happens. Real grief after anticipatory grief. And then, one day, it happens. The person you loved, cared for, and feared losing is gone. Even if you had been preparing internally for months or even years, nothing can replace the arrival of that final silence. It's common for people who've experienced anticipatory grief to believe the pain of loss will be less intense, as if they've already cried all the tears there were to cry. But real grief has a unique texture. It's not smaller, it's simply different. What changes when anticipatory grief has been lived with awareness is that real grief arrives with less numbness. There's more space to acknowledge your emotions, less shock, less denial. Sometimes there's a quiet kind of peace that blends with the sadness, a deep sense of relief, not from the end of a life, but from the end of suffering. In other situations, though, this moment can bring a new wave of guilt. Now that they're gone, why don't I feel as much as I thought I would? Or the opposite. Why does it still hurt so much, even after all the time I spent preparing? The answer lies in the nature of grief. It is unique to each of us. There is no right way to grieve, no fixed timeline or predictable stages. What we need is respect for the process and permission to feel it in our own way. If throughout the journey you were able to make space for your pain, name your exhaustion, respect your limits, and express your love in whatever way was possible, it's likely that real grief will arrive more gently, not less deeply, but more consciously. And that doesn't lessen your loss. On the contrary, it's a way of honoring it with truth. Because those who love grieve, but they must also live. Life after loss, rebuilding without forgetting. When someone we love passes away, it's as if time stands still for a moment. Everything slows down, everything loses its flavor. There's a void no one else can fill, and for a while, it feels like life left along with the person who's gone. But slowly, and almost always in subtle ways, something inside us begins to shift. First, a memory that brings a smile, then a desire to listen to an old song. Later on, a quiet wish to care for ourselves, not like before, but in a new way. Rebuilding life after loss doesn't mean erasing the one who's gone. On the contrary, it means finding ways to move forward while carrying the love that remains. There's no need to leave the memory behind. What we need to release are the chains that keep us from living again. Many people feel guilty for smiling again, for having moments of joy, for making new plans, as if that were disrespectful to the person they lost. But living with lightness after pain is a tribute. It's proof that the love was so deep, it now lives on within you. This process is deeply personal. For some, it may include turning the person's memory into something symbolic, planting a tree, writing letters, continuing a shared habit. For others, it may simply mean returning to daily life with more presence. Both are valid. What's most important to understand is that there is no end point to grief. It changes shape, softens over time, but it always remains in some corner of the soul. What does change is that, over time, it no longer fills all the space and begins to coexist with other emotions: gratitude, gentle longing, the desire to live for two. Rebuilding after loss is a slow process, but a possible one. And it begins the moment you allow yourself to live again without ever stopping loving the one who's gone. The role of therapeutic listening in this process. Throughout the entire journey, from anticipatory grief to actual loss, there is a quiet constant that can deeply transform the experience of those going through pain: therapeutic listening. Speaking with someone trained to listen without judgment, who welcomes you without rush, can be the first step toward truly feeling seen. Amid the confusion of emotions, guilt, exhaustion, and longing, a therapist helps put names to your feelings and gently organizes the inner chaos. Often, a grieving person doesn't need advice. They simply need space. Space to say, "I can't handle this," without fear of being misunderstood. Space to share how much it hurts and still be met with compassion. Therapy offers that safe place. In addition, therapeutic support helps you reconnect with your personal story, because grief often reopens old wounds, insecurities, and childhood beliefs about love and loss. With professional guidance, it becomes possible to recognize these patterns and tend to deeper pain that may go beyond the current situation. It's important to remember, seeking help doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're choosing to go through this process with more support, more awareness, and more self-love. If you feel overwhelmed, stuck, or lost, it might be time to talk to someone who can hold that pain with professionalism and empathy. Sometimes just one session can spark a light, a hope that it's possible to keep going, one step at a time. An invitation to kindness, moving through this process with less guilt and more humanity. If you've made it this far, you might be going through one of life's most challenging moments. Maybe you're caring for someone you deeply love, feeling the pain of loss even before it happens. Or maybe you've already said goodbye and are now trying to relearn how to live. Wherever you are on this journey, there's something essential to remember. You don't have to get everything right, you just have to be human. Guilt is one of the most common emotions in grief, especially anticipatory grief. Small and large guilts, real and imagined. Guilt for losing your temper, for not doing more, for feeling relief, for still being here. But the truth is, no love is perfect, and no goodbye comes without its flaws. What transforms pain isn't the absence of mistakes, it's the presence of compassion. And it all starts with self-compassion, with the courage to look at your own vulnerability without punishment, to show up for yourself on the good days and on the days when everything feels like it's falling apart. Moving through this process with less guilt is a daily practice of listening, pausing, and being honest. It's understanding that there is no right way to grieve, there is only your way, and that in itself deserves respect. Be kind to your pain, be patient with your limits. And remember, to love also means allowing yourself to move forward, even with longing in your heart. This video doesn't offer ready-made answers, but maybe it planted a small seed of relief, the beginning of a path where love no longer has to walk hand in hand with the weight of guilt. You're not alone, and it's okay if, for today, all you can do is breathe.